Well, good Monday morning to everyone. It's Monday, April 14th, 2025. We're here this morning for a work session. Our discussion item today is the Generative AI Policy Review and AI Updates. I'm Kristen Stevens, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. With me is my fellow Commissioner, John Kafalis. We have Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally on the phone this morning. We have our, at the dais, we also have our County Manager, Lorenda Volker, and we have Mark Pfaffinger, our Chief Information Officer and Internal Services Director, and Greg Turnbull, our Director of Innovations and Insights in Information Technology, and also Laura Walker is here, Director of Human Service, Health and Human and Economic Health. Okay, all right. Sorry, it took me a minute to get that right. It's Monday morning, but so all is forgiven. And shall we turn it over to Greg? Okay, wonderful. Good morning.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Thank you for the time today. It's been about a year since we sat and we had our first work session discussing AI and some of the needs that we have at the county. There's been some fruit, and we wanted to highlight where we're at and really dive into the policy, which I think is the star of the show today. But before that, we wanted to highlight some of the changes that we've seen, some of how staff is using the tools, and how we're seeing growth in this space. Quick agenda for today. As I mentioned, we're going to go through over some of the use. We have real data. We've got survey results from folks from the staff, and then a couple of use cases that have popped up. We'll go through the policy, as I mentioned, and then we also have some staff guidelines that we're presenting. Some of the meat and potatoes that people, how to use the tools, and they change more often than, say, the policy. And then just maybe talking through some of the next steps and just open-ended discussion on the topic. All right, without further ado, just some of the updated stats. So last time we met, we reviewed what we saw was a huge uptick in use of generative AI. We have the ability to monitor access to these tools on our firewall and on our networks. So starting in January, we had very flat lines. There wasn't a lot of activity, and then we saw it starting to creep up. So by May of that same year, 150, let's see, that's 1.5 million transactions. But that's nothing compared to this year. So that little box in the bottom that you can see, that was last year. And we're now seeing, 6.8 million calls out to these services for use on the county network. So people are very busy. It's not just that they're seeking these tools out, but there's a lot of technologies that have it built in, that it's part of the program now. So as you can see, some pretty significant growth in utility there. We also did an update. Last year at this time, we had an open-ended employee survey to ask, how are you using it? How do you feel about AI? What are some of the common uses that you're getting? So this year we had almost 400 of our staff members complete the follow-up survey. And we've seen about double the growth of folks that are actually using the platforms, at least self promoting that they're using the platforms more readily, not only in private, but also in their county work, their day-to-day work, they're using some generative AI. So from 22% yes to about 44%. We again asked, well, what type of work are you doing using generative AI? Some are using it for customer support, creating or generating content, images. People use it to check or write code. It helps in that space. We've got a big blue other box. We didn't dive too much into that, but then there's also working through strategies and scenarios. They're just leaning into these tools and asking questions. And then a data analysis piece as well, throwing spreadsheets or data and having the tool assist them in that space. And I do apologize if any questions come up during the time. We can jump in as well. But
Okay. Looks like we'll wait for
yeah,
now.
I'll just go through some of the survey results and then we can maybe pause. Apologies for that. We asked what type of tools are being used. Again, ChatGPT is the king of current use for generative AI. Gemini is a very similar tool, powered by Google. It's in second, and a lot of folks are still leaning on Grammarly to help with their writing. Grammarly is a built-in tool. It works similar to ChatGPT, but it's more focused on grammar, writing more concisely. It helps people in real time. Grammarly's actually been a popular tool, but now it leans a lot more on generative AI now. Some of the other hits at the top, Claude, Copilot, those are similar tools to ChatGPT. And then Dolly is an image creation tool. So you can prompt it to say, create a logo or create an image, and Dolly can generate that image for you. Like the one that's the cover of this slideshow that we just started. And then I think this is our last data point, but we just asked specifically, how do you feel about the use of AI in county work? And so this is the sentiment analysis piece. And last year it was roughly half and half, and 56% of folks were neutral. This year we've seen the positives jump up to 28% and the negatives recede to 15%. So we're seeing more positive impressions of the use of generative AI. Maybe they've actually used it themselves. Neutral is still holding strong at about 56, 57%.
Any questions, Commissioner Qualls?
Not at this time. I do have a couple, but I'd like to wait till the end.
Okay, we'll
Thanks.
keep going then.
Thanks for asking.
Commissioner Shattuck McNally, any questions you have right now?
Not at this time, thank you.
I think I'm Mark Faffinger, the Sports Services Director and CIO, thank you. These types of charts do seem to mirror the adoption cycle you see in new technology. There's usually laggards and people that start early. And so we're starting to see there's still a decent portion of our organization that probably hasn't dabbled much in AI yet. But the ones that are using it more are starting to have a more positive impression. That seems to be coming up in some of my conversations with folks. A lot of them are like, please don't take these away. It's really changed the way I do my job. Or others are like, what do you mean? Like, how are you using it? And so there is a learning cycle that I think is indicative in what we need to do next within our program. And I'm sure we'll get to those discussion points here towards the end. So I'll let you go ahead.
So to finish out the use case or the use of generative AI, I just wanted to highlight some of the things that folks have either reported doing or that we've seen in real time on our networks. The biggest one is for sure refining their message or their content, and that's you can put content into the AI and say make it more concise or make it more brief, make it friendlier. Everyone has gotten that email where your first response is emotional, and sometimes it's nice to run it through AI and say, can you take the emotion out and make the message more positive? And then rewriting for clarity, putting content in and just saying, hey, can you clear this up or make it more clean as the content? A lot of refining of the message. That's been the big hit. Our web teams, there's, again, a big push for accessibility across the board and digital accessibility. We can rewrite our web content for 8th grade reading level, which is a target to make sure that folks can understand the content. Looking at these large images, and we can create text to describe it. Alternative text is an important piece of when you have non-sighted users or blind users using our website, we have to provide alternative information. And then when we get accessibility errors, leaning on systems to say, how can I fix this? And this happens not just in accessibility, but other tools as well. AI is a great companion to have along when you're trying to fix or troubleshoot systems. Jumping in, one of the examples, working with Lori Hodges on the Community Resilience Assessment Survey, taking on a huge set of survey results and just throwing it at Gemini and asking it, hey, look uncover some interesting insights. And this is just one of the examples. Most respondents of that survey, they felt prepared in case of an emergency, but a significant portion felt less prepared for power outages. And that was just, I just threw the data at it and said, give me some insights. And we did this, we worked with Lori this year to provide some information for her survey results report. Zoom has a significant offering as far as AI or generative AI. It can sit in the meeting with you. It can provide updates in real time. If you've been mentioned, it can give you summaries after the fact or during the meeting. You can ask questions. I did really like the note of like, how many times have I been mentioned and what's my homework? Like, do I have tasks from this meeting after the fact? So that's already an offering that we have in Zoom that we've been pushing out or have pushed out. And finally, there's one example that I really like, and that's this Notebook LM tool. Just it can take really large documents or multiple documents. It can summarize those for you. It can compare old versus new. And there's even a feature that it creates like an NPR style interview that can go through the document and give you some, the ability to kind of get the summary of the document, but you can listen to it versus reading. So those are a couple of the use cases that we've seen bouncing around. And that's the end of the use case and the data. I don't know if we want to.
Yeah, we may want to stop for questions here
Yeah.
because the next portion we're going into is policy. So if anybody has any questions on what's been covered thus far, we can do that right now. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. A couple of questions that I noted here. One is to go back to the beginning, one of your beginning slides. Could you further clarify or explain what is meant by web transactions to generative AI services? I think you touched on it, but
Sure.
a little bit more explanation would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So when we look at, there's two ways that we can really monitor traffic on our firewall. One is the size or the amount of data, the gigabytes that are passed back and forth, and also the transactions, like individual calls from our internal network or our computers to those services that are out on the web. And this transaction, that's those individual calls. So every time I hit the submit button, then I'm prompting ChatGPT, a call is made out to those servers and information comes back. So it's really the back and forth between our servers or our computers and theirs that are in the cloud.
So that reflects employee web transactions when they're actually using one of these tools?
Yeah, to clarify, I think what we're starting to see is again, it's Mark again.
I haven't forgotten.
Okay. A lot of our systems have now been enabling AI inside the software itself. And so, yes, many of these transactions may be employee generated, but a lot of them are actually happening in the background. So if you're in Google, for instance, in your email box, Gemini is actually doing some things on the sidebar to offer up summaries or suggestions or things like that. Even Microsoft is enabling more of that capability within like the Word document when you're typing a document. Zoom when you're in a Zoom meeting. So yes, a portion of this is generated by employees actually asking systems through prompts to provide feedback to questions they have. There's another element of this that's happening where our software is starting to have automatic AI activities happening in the background that you don't actually have any control over. So both of those things are attributing, I think, to this increase in AI volume.
May I do a quick follow-up? Just a couple more colleagues. Thank you. And I assume that in terms of these web transactions that are mostly employee-generated, that would include elected officials who are attempting to use these tools? Okay.
Anytime you're on our county network and interacting with the internet at all, you're going through our safety systems and our tools that monitor traffic for safety. And one of the cool things we can do is also collect data like use of AI through those engines that are monitoring your interactions with the internet. And so that's how we're able to get access to a lot of this information. If you're doing anything on your personal devices, we're not collecting that data.
What about personal devices?
We do not collect your personal device would not be representative in here. So if you're using it on a smartphone or at home on your home computer,
Oh, that's not,
we're not tracking that
I
traffic.
wonder if that's, it seems like, forgive me, Madam Chair, just a little bit of dialogue here. So some of us work a reasonable amount of time from home using our own personal computer that has access to the, all the, most of what we have here. So when I'm attempting to use Notebook LM, for example, or Chat GPT, for example, you're not tracking that?
Correct.
Why?
Because it's not a county device, so we don't have responsibility over.
Are we missing an important piece of information that might be useful for future consideration? Just a thought, I don't know.
I think, we're encouraging folks to sample with AI tools using their personal home computers, but as a county, we can only be responsible for the traffic that is on devices that we have control over, that we're routing through our systems. It would be very expensive and probably a little bit,
Okay.
I don't know that most employees want us to put our monitoring software on their personal home computers.
Oh. It looks like Laura Walker wants to say something, and then I can pause.
Oh, yeah, did you want to come up, Laura, and speak?
That's interesting, though.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Laura Walker, Human and Economic Health Director for the county. And I just wanted to point out that a lot of the folks that work from home on a regular basis are still using a county device to do so. And so I just wanted to throw that into the mix to clarify that most folks who have a regular working at home cadence are bringing home their county laptop. And although they're not on site here, that would still be tracked in my understanding.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, anyone using a county-issued laptop, even from home or a coffee shop or anywhere, we are monitoring and tracking those for safety.
That's interesting. It prompts me to think about whether I should be carrying the company laptop home more often, but still not quite sure. I'll pause. I have a few more questions, but perhaps Commissioner Shaddock-McNally,
Sure.
you have questions or comments?
I mean, I think most of us do take our laptops home and use those laptops, so, I mean, I don't use
outlier
my
again.
personal computer for work. Commissioner Shaddock-McNally, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do use the county laptop. I take it home and really very, very diligent and careful that I only use that computer for work, and I have my personal computer for other things, which I even take on trips for the conference and stuff to make sure I'm extremely careful with that. I'm wondering about, there's lots of things on our phones even that sometimes we access our emails and things via phones, and there's opportunities to use some of those AI tools on our phones. So how is that tracked as well? Because I have a county cell phone and I have a personal cell phone, so I'm wondering how that's tracked.
The only time we're really tracking most county phone interactions with the internet is if you're connected to our county wireless network. Then we're actually are monitoring the transactions. But in different software, like our Google has some security systems built into the Google platform itself. So if you're using Google on your personal phone, you're getting some benefits from that. But in general, if you're using ChatGPT on your personal device and you're connected to the Verizon network, we're not tracking any of those transactions with our statistics.
So, Mark, it sounds like if you're using a county device or a county network, that's when we know what's going on. Otherwise, we consider it a personal device. It's your personal business, essentially. Even if you are looking up something on ChatGPT for the benefit of the county, we're just not tracking that.
That's correct.
So we're getting probably a pretty good number of how much we're using, but certainly not a 100% capturing everything kind of thing, and that's okay.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
If I might, Madam Chair, can I ask one more question?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Forgive me, my brain is still trying to wake up today. I'm wondering about, I think you presented on this about certain tools that maybe are not wise to use, or maybe you're going to bring this up for the policy, and where would we find a list of those that you would recommend extra security or not engaging with? And I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, so as far as the tools that we steer off, we haven't created a collective list of tools that we're trying to have folks avoid. We have blocked certain tools. For DeepSeek was one of the tools that was AI competitor from China. But again, all the information you put in that tool, it was shipped overseas to their servers. So as to date, and we may do more of this with when we put the policy out there and have a little more central guidance. But we've just been blocking the tools that we see as dangerous right now at the firewall.
Commissioner, if I can add,
Thank you.
I can add one thing. The volume of tools that are emerging is really hard to track for us right now. With some of our guideline tools that we're putting together, we're hoping to create a more dynamic space to put information out for employees and give them use cases to practice on over the next year to start to become good, safe consumers of this technology. I would say in general, we're trying to avoid the use of systems that aren't tried and tested. And so some of that's enveloped. As we get into the policy discussion, I think you'll have a better idea of what the guidance really covers. And it is kind of that common sense structure of a policy that we're trying to go forward with, mostly because the emergence of this technology is so dynamic right now. It's really hard for us to create a comprehensive list of the do's and don'ts right now. And so we're creating more of a framework and a guidance structure to help us guide ourselves into this pathway of where we're headed.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioner?
No, at this time, thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Cafalas? Yep.
If we could go to slide 8, please. Yeah,
Which one was it? Sorry, I'm
that's
looking
the
at
previous one. At least on here, it says 8 is
There's the one.
previous.
Yep.
Yeah. My question there has to do with, it talks about the percentages, type of work-related tasks, et cetera, data analysis. Where's content analysis? Summarizing, analyzing documents, like you talked about a little bit later on, Greg, with Notebook LM. Is that in that 132? Is that included in there, I suppose?
Yeah, and this one's a little tricky. This is tied to the survey results. So it could be subjective to how the folks answered. Like they could be using the same tool. Their data analysis might be generating some content, but specifically calling out creation of content, images, and code was part of that 32%. But it's really subjective to how the survey was answered.
Then, thank you. Just moving along quickly here. The next question I have is somewhat, I think, related to what Commissioner Shattuck McNally brought up. But I'm wondering, the list of all the tools that we currently use, is there a summary of each of those tools and a link to those tools? Because what you listed on one of these slides, I guess it's the next one,
Yeah.
I had no idea about those top 4 or Grammarly. At this point, Greg has trained me to use ChatGPT and Notebook LM.
Mm-hmm.
Is it appropriate to develop a list of these that we're currently comfortable with and making that available, at least to some of us who need it?
Yeah, to the point Mark had earlier, I think it's not a bad idea to start to create some here's some safe tools or here's some
Safe tools.
Useful tools. But it's also that small group, it's immense. There's a lot of tools. Adobe has built-in tools to help with image creation. The Grammarly's, there's other versions of Grammarly's, competitors. The Claude, the one at the top left there, the 2.6%, it's a competitor for both ChatGPT or Gemini. So it's a growing, really blossoming area. And it's not just these, but other vendors that we lean on, whether it's Tyler Technologies or Civic, Civic Plus, many of the Civics, all these groups are starting to come up with their own generative
Just
tools.
to add the fun to this, Notebook LM is part of Gemini.
Correct.
So Gemini is actually the engine that encompasses the Notebook LM structure. So it's a very emerging field. I think in our guidance, which we'll discuss here in a bit when we get into the policy really points people to guidance. And so I think we're looking for feedback, and that's really helpful. If you think it would be helpful to have a more comprehensive list of some of the vetted tools, I think that's really good feedback we'd like to add to our guidance document as we move forward, as we start building out the more comprehensive how-to information that employees are clamoring for right now.
That would be my recommendation, perhaps a list of the vetted tools that might be helpful.
Thank you.
Last question, Madam Chair, and then we can move on, or you may very well have questions. And that is, going back to the device thing, from a security perspective, I think I know the answer to this. If I'm working from home a certain percentage of the time, should I be bringing home my
My
company PC?
recommendation, Commissioner Kafalis, is if you're doing work for the county from home, you should take your county laptop and do it from that device, because that device has all the security software, the monitoring tools, the protections you need to not get spoofed or potentially, corrupt your home computer. We have a lot of the systems in place you won't have at your house computer in order to protect yourself more.
Even though I'm accessing the network, the county network, to get emails and OCTA and all the rest.
Well, not to belabor the point, you're actually using you're not using the county's network, you're using the internet to get to those systems directly from your home computer. So what you're bypassing is the county's network, which actually does the security protections and controls. When you use your home device, you don't get to talk to our county network or any of the systems that protect our data on purpose, because we don't know what's going on your home computer. We don't know if your home computer has a virus on it. And so that's why we keep a firewall between county equipment and home equipment.
Thank you, and it appears that I will attempt to change my behavior.
Any other questions?
No, thanks, Madam Chair.
I have a couple questions before we move on from this topic. So, with something like the Zoom meeting assistant, is that something that other people see? Because I will say that I feel like I've been in meetings where people are like, "You're capturing the notes on this," like, that's an invasion of privacy, or like, "We don't want notes captured on this meeting," kind of thing. So is that, that's visible to others, and that's something that you probably, is the protocol to sort of ask folks, "Hey, do you mind if I use this technology when I'm taking this meeting?"
Yeah, and
Okay.
there's usually a prompt whenever you join a meeting that has some of these capabilities turned on, like, hey, this feature's turned on, there's going to be notes or collection of content. Some is just even transcripts, just transcribing the meeting as a feature that's turned on.
Yeah, our county system in general provide alerts to all the members, and they all have to approve.
Oh, okay.
Similar to when you're recording a meeting. Have you ever seen those prompts? When
Yes.
the meeting's being recorded. So we're trying to use those similar, everyone should be aware, everyone should be okay with
Right.
it, approach to when we're running those kind of systems. The systems outside of the county that we're not in charge of, if you're being invited to meetings with teams or something, we really can't vouch for how those systems are set up. There could be AI running on those platforms that you're not aware of.
Oh, interesting. Zoom is more transparent about those systems running then.
And the way we've set it up on our
I mean-
standard configuration at the county.
Yeah, okay, good to know. I just have had that where there's been a concern of, like, private, information or information that's deliberative being sort of, I don't know.
The thing can happen is you can actually have a member of the meeting that you don't know is actually an AI bot. And it could have a name to it, like Joe Smith.
oh, interesting.
So Otter AI used to show up at meetings before Zoom embedded these solutions inside the platform so they could be managed better. So yeah, you really do want to look at your participant list to make sure there's no unexpected members joining the meeting that can collect data. Those are just some of the tools that people can use to kind of circumvent the security of the system.
Good to know, and scary.
Welcome to that 25% on that one chart.
There's been some interest expressed in inviting this Zoom AI agent to, I think it was the Board of Health was asking us questions about it. It's usually as good as the audio in the room. So that's another component because
Okay.
it's trying really hard to not only capture the people that are controlling the meeting and in front of the mics, but potentially folks asking questions as well. And there's a consent piece there that'll probably come up. But I know that there's a lot of interest in being able to collect the information, making, real-time transcripts, summaries, but then also that need for privacy. So I think we're going to hear more commentary about this.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I have, and it also probably goes to policy too, but when we're talking about sort of bias, like if I say I want to generate a picture of a leader in the community, am I going to get a man with a briefcase, a white man with a briefcase still? I mean, that's the kind of bias that, or with the machine learning that's happened and all that kind of stuff, is that some of that?
Some of that bias is built into the engines because it's using data from the community in order to take the most common attributes. And so they're inherently biased because our community is inherently somewhat biased in general. So that's where learning how to write prompts, and Greg could talk about this probably more, getting educated in writing prompts that are more specific will help you get the results that you're more looking for. So prompt writing for AI generation of stuff or to get the results you're looking for is really the key aspect of using these systems effectively. So if you don't know how to game the system and write prompts in a way that get the results you're looking for, they're inherently going to be a little bit generic. And so I think that's really the education that we're going to have to learn over the next few years is prompt writing.
Right.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, that's one of the first examples we highlighted with the bias, whether it was Amazon's hiring, it only looked for males because they only had male engineers at the time. There's just a lot of cases where these companies and these groups that run these systems are trying to refine it. But there's two parts of that. It's the data that's in the system and then also our prompts. So we can introduce bias just in our prompts that we write as well. So to Mark's point, part of the training, part of the awareness is understanding that these systems have bias. When you're working with them, you may have to modify your prompt to try to alleviate that bias and get to the result that you're seeking.
Is there any attempt at a sort of higher level to try to mitigate for some of that bias?
These are called models. So all the companies, you hear the term model. The model of a generative AI system is constantly being tweaked by the companies like ChatGPT, by Gemini, to try to eliminate more and more of that kind of aspect. But it's inherent to any system that was human built or data driven. So it's only as good as the information being put into it that you're going to get out of it. And so the only way we can navigate that is just to be better consumers. And to be a better consumer is to learn how to write your prompts in a way that eliminates some of that bias from the system.
And so is that training that we give to staff as we're going through, using these tools? Because, okay. Because I think identifying the bias, is something that feels very important as we rely on these tools more and more.
Absolutely.
That's a great segue to the policy.
Yeah, let's.
Because the policy really is kind of the ethics around, as an organization, how do we value AI as a tool, but how do we mitigate some of the bias and other concerns that come up with it? Because we really haven't thought about training or resource lists or those kind of things until we nail down this philosophy that we're going to have around use of AI, because it can be really helpful. But you can go out on the internet and find all the information you want that supports the opinion you already have. Right. We have to be really careful as we write prompts that we're not doing that same thing as an organization. What you do in your private life is your own business. What you do for us needs to be neutral and community focused, and not have that inherent bias to the extent that we can work to get it out of the way.
Thank you. So let's then segue into the policy piece.
Okay. So when we last met, we said this is one of our big to-dos, and as you mentioned, Lorinda, like a foundational piece that we can then lean in to create our guidelines and our training, and really, it was a must for us to dive in and create a policy. So, real quick, just a run through of some of the things that we went through to get to this point where we have a policy in front of you to discuss. Starting last year at this time, the Government AI Coalition. There was a lot of work, hundreds of groups across the country, municipal, state, local government level, collectively saying, what do we do with policy? What do we do with guidelines to try to get to a point where our staff, we feel comfortable with them using these tools? We are a part of that coalition, having discussions at Seagate, the Colorado group, the IT group that we were part of, and then we meet with yearly. They too were in the same boat, discussing policy and guidelines for generative AI use. Our own Equity, Diversion, and Inclusion Advisory Board, we've met with them a few times, discussed this policy specifically, gotten their feedback and their guidance, which is excellent. We have our internal IT teams that are doing research and development, and they're diving into how to use the tools. You know, how will we think about this in the lens of policy or guidelines to help our staff? And finally, that Power DMS, we were like ready for the show, and we took the policy and we ran it through the Power DMS. And I'll jump to the next slide because that highlights the steps that we went through in that space, where we're submitting it. Our internal IT policy group reviewed it, provided great guidance as well. Larimer County's policy committee as a whole, again, different eyes, different groups providing their guidance. The county attorney, and then finally we kind of bring it to you after it's gone through that process. Along the way, there was a couple things in here. You'll see there's a number 7 that was marked off, or number 8 that Mark kindly caught. The White House had a Bill of Rights, I believe, for AI, and it was part of the thing that we leaned on when we wrote this. And in that time frame, that whole website and that thing disappeared, so we had to do some cleanup at the last minute. But yeah, that kind of led us to where we're at. So highlighting the policy, just like anything, we need to set our terms. What is AI? What are some of the AI principles? Defining some of the other items that are important. And again, if we want to dive into any one of these parts, we can discuss as well. But just to give some summary, the purpose, why we have this policy, the references section, like I said, we want to lean on our existing data privacy, our protection policies that the county already has in place, as well as some of the state and federal level documents that guide the work. The scope, again, this is for the county as a whole. Not only our staff, but also volunteers, our vendors and contractors that play a role in how we do our work. And then its responsibility, we kind of lean that with Mark, with IT, as the person that he gets to be the responsible one. But if we want to,
could you at least touch on human in the loop? I think it's a really important element.
It is really important. Yeah. So, human in the loop is a component that when we generate content using these tools, we don't just release it to the world. We don't release code without reviewing it. We don't release content or images without reviewing it. The human is the person that prompts or generates it, but they're also the ones that they're the safeguard. They look at the generated content, review it, and there's always a human that should be in the loop. We've talked about releasing a chatbot on our site before. If we ever do that, and I'm always leery about doing that, but if we lean on and we produce a chatbot, there should always be a way for someone to say, hey, I need to talk to a person, or I need to elevate this to get information from a county staff member. So it's really just saying that there should always be a human or a person that is engaged or available before we're generating content from these systems.
I think that's a really good example. So one of the places we're looking at a potential for a chatbot is our employee benefits, where employees could call in rather than having to read pages and pages of a benefits document. It is a pretty finite document. It covers what it covers. It says it doesn't cover what it doesn't cover. And so it's a pretty black and white, yes or no kind of a situation. And people will still have questions, and maybe that will answer the question they need to know right now. What's my copay? What's my deductible? Those kind of things. But if they want to know about a procedure, they're probably going to want to reach a person. And so that should always be an option. So that's an example of how we might try to practice using some of these tools, these chatbot tools.
Yeah. So that kind of breaks down the high level or the preamble, I guess, to the policy. are there any other questions that we want to look at in this space? Because the next would just be the actual meat of the policy.
Yeah, I think we'll just go to the meat of the policy.
All right. So, the actual sections of the policy cover the acquisition or the purchase of generative AI technology, the use of generative AI. When you're using the AI to create content, it's attributing it, making sure there's transparency involved, that you can go back and say, I've used generative AI to create this content or this copy. A little bit of focus on reduction of bias and harm, which we've talked about a little bit. And then how data privacy and how that, again, this kind of ties back to some of our already existing policies, but how it plays a role in generative AI, avoiding putting content, that shouldn't be pumped into the AI system, like our PIIs or our HIPAAs and all those things that we need to protect. Again, we already have these things in place. We just don't want to lose sight of that when we introduce generative AI. Open records and county records management. If we're doing work with these systems, we should be able to have some record of the prompts that were used. Right now, Gemini and other tools, they do allow you to keep track of the prompts, especially if you're using them for county content, rewriting web copy, rewriting, for example, it could be this policy in front of us. If I've used generative AI, how has it been used? And then what are potential exceptions to the rule? And those should be very slim and defined and highlighted. But again, we can kind of step into this and have a conversation around any of these pieces if you're interested.
Any questions, Commissioner Shannock McNally?
Not at this time. This all makes sense. Thank you.
We'll keep going then.
Okay.
I think the next section's where they're going to want to, based on the previous comments, I think the user guidelines is really where the meat of this is.
Yeah. So this is the foundational piece. This is kind of the helpful, and the living, breathing document that we're releasing is this guidelines for staff. Right now, and this seems to be a great place to put it, but it's hosted in our knowledge management for IT users. It's available to any county staff member. But here's some highlights for that staff guidelines. As I mentioned, it's living, breathing document. It will continually change as we see different use cases or as we see new technology emerge. The focus is on that responsible use of tools like ChatGPT or Gemini. The privacy, protect privacy, we really want to put that in front of folks. Like I said, whether it's personal, confidential, CJIS, it needs to cover all of those data types. Site usage is a very big one, and it's interesting as we're putting this out there for folks to review, that came back a lot more, that people really want to know when these tools are used. They want to be, it's okay to use them, but they want to be familiar. You're not just, have ChatGPT do my homework and turn that in. We want to have clarity that you've used these solutions. Trying to separate, we talked about personal versus the county work. People are finding a lot of use for this. I use it all the time for recipes now. Instead of going out and digging for recipes, I just say, can you give me a recipe and swap out what I have in the fridge for what it says to do. And it does a good job. But that's different than the county work that we have day to day. That checking the tone is, we've seen a lot of use for that. Checking the tone of our communication, of our documents, of our web copy or content. And then the big piece for the highlights for the staff is just to stay informed. We're going to continually evolve these guidelines, like as you mentioned, Commissioner Kafalas. But if there's new tools that we want to say this is a great one, or maybe a tool that isn't so great after a while, after we see maybe some misalignment with what our guidelines are. But those are the high levels of what the staff guidelines are.
Any comments or questions?
I think there are a couple more slides, and then we'll have about 15 minutes or so to have a bit of a conversation.
Yeah, we'll finish this.
Yeah. The next piece is really just to talk about what our next steps are. From last year till today, we've done an immense amount of work on the policy. We have guidelines that are in a ready state. We've released those to certain groups as they're starting to dabble in generative AI. But a big piece for us is just to get the policy in front of the staff, get the policy out there and enact that policy. We then feel confident to start promoting the generative AI guidelines, evolving those as we see that they're needed. Thank you, Laura Walker, for being here for support. Strategic plan. This is a big piece of that. The AI. We've talked a little bit more about training, which we think is really important. But we also talk as part of that strategic plan. We also have purchasing involved, looking at how do we train folks before they say yes with their P cards or yes to big software technologies that may have generative AI or AI built into them. We just want to train folks before they buy those solutions and turn them loose. There's vendor engagement. We talked about do we have a short list of solutions that we suggest? And some of it is we have the opportunity to work with Google or with ChatGPT, which is OpenAI, or with other vendors on more concrete relationships as far as how we use the tools. Usually there's a cost. There's a pretty significant cost that we have to be protective of. So right now, we're letting a lot of these tools be used, but I think our focus is on the staff training and the safety, the bias awareness. Those are some of the things we're focusing on, but we realize there might be an opportunity to single in and say, here's the preferred Larimer County tool. And we're still trying to work that piece out. And that last piece is just improving reporting and security. We already have a firewall in place, and they have features that are specific to generative AI. We can monitor prompts at the firewall level. We can actually see what's coming or going. We could be protective of data to say, hey, that looked like a social security number that just got pumped into the tool. Right now, for some of the statistics I provided for use, I have to dive in and do a lot of crunching. There's opportunities to build real-time dashboards within the tool. And that's something that we're exploring as IT, just to be more mindful of the comings and goings and how people are using generative AI. So our next steps, I just want to kind of outline what our thoughts are there.
All right. So now we're to the questions and comments. Commissioner, are we?
Sorry.
Yes. Commissioner Shattuck McNally, any comments or questions that you have after the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just want to say thank you to Greg and Mark and all the staff, and for Laura for supporting this, and Lorenda, because this is something that we've been talking about for a couple of years. Madam Chair, remember you and I went to the Capitol Conference in the summer of 2022, and this was a big discussion about getting ahead and getting policy and making sure we understood the pros and the cautions for AI in our work. I try to stay on top of this, and I appreciate the policy and the direction and the guidance. It certainly is a great place to start. I feel that it's great that we're moving forward on this, and I think the guidance and the recommendations for the policy are spot on and something that I'm sure will evolve as we go forward. I use Gemini and ChatGPT. We used ChatGPT to write my nephew's obituary, which was hard, but it was very a helpful tool at an emotional time when we couldn't really think about writing it. So it has lots of different uses, and I'm certainly trying to stay as informed as possible and understanding kind of some of the safety, especially at this current uncertain times where we have lots of cybersecurity issues. So first, just my heartfelt gratitude for helping us get to a place where we can start to, it's always hard to get from something where we don't have any kind of policy and move forward, so I appreciate that. So I don't know if this question was asked. Those my two questions are, first, is this policy separate and in addition to our cybersecurity work? That's my first question. And how do you navigate that? And then two, when will we reviewing or updating this policy? Will it be yearly, or will you be watching it? Because these areas change and advance so quickly. And again, my heartfelt gratitude for this information today.
Right. As far as the policy, we have on here until superseded. The goal of the policy is to be more concrete and then have the guidelines take on and evolve. We could probably set up some level of review cycle. Oh, every 1 year, yeah. To effective date every year. It is on an annual basis. I do apologize for that. And then as far as the separation, it is a separate policy. It is very targeted to generative AI versus the cybersecurity. They do complement each other. The use or the protection of privacy, protection of data, considerations with cybersecurity all have a part within this policy, but this is specific to generative AI.
That's helpful. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. I have no further questions or comments. Just thankful we're going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I support this.
Thank you, Commissioner Shannon McNally. Commissioner Cavalas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So two comments. One is regarding the discussion earlier about maybe creating some kind of a summary document. I think we all agree that would be a good thing to do. And from my perspective, including the links, but maybe a brief summary of what that particular tool does and so forth. Related to that, it seems to me when you indicated like this policy document and the guidelines, and they'll be housed in certain parts of our website, maybe part of that summary document could include links to these, policies so folks can easily access them. So that's one comment, bit of feedback. The other one is I wanted to quickly offer an example, and maybe it gets to the one way of trying to minimize or mitigate harm and bias. So recently I used ChatGPT to come up with a draft of a address that I made, a welcoming address at the Powwow Association. They had their powwow, and I'm learning more about prompts, and that's really important information, and that's part of the education. But I was very specific. I put in the theme of the event, but then I also said comments from me, because I assume it can look up stuff about me and kind of get a perspective of where I'm coming from. So all of that, it produced and I said a 3-minute, draft, and it produced something that I thought I couldn't do a whole lot better. Although I did edit it and I did make some changes and I added some things. But I guess I offer that as an example. There was two reasons, I think. One is that there was a part of me that felt like I didn't edit it enough, and therefore should I have made reference to that, cite it, that I used AI to come up with the draft. Although I did. And the other part of me was, is that a lesson? Because if we want to include as much information, that might help reduce bias. Because if you put in something blank about Native Americans or Indians, perhaps it could churn up something. But if you put in the specifics, it actually came up something which I think was very sensitive and acknowledged a whole lot of things. And then hopefully I enhanced that with my changes. Any thoughts there, if that makes any sense?
Sure. I think, as you start to use the tool, like you said, you can do a prompt and then you take it, and then the goal isn't just to take that and go with it. It's usually back and forth. It's an iterative process. It can come alongside you. The more information you provide, like you said,
The less chance for...
Yeah, it gets you
bias.
closer to the finished product. And you can always tune it to the content that you want. But it is something we have to be mindful in the guidelines, like how people are going to use it, or when they cite it, when it's important to cite the content.
I think to your experience, the more you can give it or train it stuff that you've actually created yourself, the better job it can do to create drafts that are kind of in that same vein. the same thing happens with data at the county. The more we can train it with actual county vetted information and keep the model only to that area of information, not to go out to the internet to add its own flavor to it, the more control we have over the output of the engines. And so it's kind of both sides a little bit. I think at the end of the day, you did the right thing. You were human in the middle. You gave it a decent amount of information to do a good job giving you a draft, and then you took that and you made it yours. That's the kind of thing we're hearing a lot of our staff doing today. It's saving a lot of time on repetitive tasks that we do. And hopefully it's not removing the person, which is never the goal here, is to keep that human element always present, because then you'll always get a better output. These systems are built by people. They don't generate data on their own. These models are human created. And so anything we can do to stay in the loop of that process will produce better outcomes.
I think I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I, support the policy, and I'm really glad that you've been thoughtful about how to do this, because I do think you're absolutely right that it's a great tool. It can enhance our work. It can cut down on some of our work. And if it's not used correctly, it can be problematic. And so I think that as we train folks in the organization to use that tool, because if I have that bias this has that bias, how will I know when I look for bias to, right? I mean, and so so some of that gets a little bit tricky, sort of, if both I and AI have that inherent bias, like, how do we make sure that we're not, really, how can we really proactively look for that bias, right? And so, and I think in a lot of situations, it's maybe not as crucial, right? Because it's sort of like a document that maybe planning is doing or something like that. But I think about the human services world where Laura works, and that bias is really important, that we don't leave people out, or that we are providing the right services to the right people. And so I love this. I like that about this policy, is it really contemplates some of the misuse and problems that we might encounter, and how to make sure that we're training folks to write those prompts in the way that we're not getting, and don't get me wrong, there are white men that are leaders. Clearly, there are two at the table right now, but that's not the only, those aren't the only leaders, right? I mean, there are leaders that are young and older and right? And so, we just need to be conscious of that. I mean, we all have those biases, but how do we kind of keep each other on the straight and narrow with that kind of work, right? And so, anyway, I think that's the real challenge here.
Commissioner Stephen, just to comment on that, we're hoping to actually have kind of a working group within the county, a community of, I'll take practitioners that are really driving this policy, to start working together to bring these topics forward, to have conversations, to share good and bad that they've experienced the tool, so we can guide the creation of our guidance and our other things. So we're hoping to work with our strategic planning group on getting some of those kind of communities of practice formed to help guide this together, because IT can't do this alone. These are tools being used in the department. We only have so much awareness of what's going on. The other thing I'll just add, this is kind of added extra stuff. Most of this software that we have we're being told by our vendors that the AI technologies are going to be built in. We're going to have to pay for them, and we cannot remove them going forward. And so, as an example, Google's already said Gemini will be included in your next release, and you can't take it out. Microsoft has also started to do that within our Office products. We're expecting a price increase because of that, because AI isn't free. So what's our approach? Either we go stick our head in the hole and we use open source software, or we get the value out of the products that we need to get out of. That's going to require training and deliberative work with our staff to teach them how to use these tools well. We're hoping to partner with a strategic plan to really start driving that forward.
Thank you, Mark. And we are out of time, and it's 11, but this is a great conversation. I hope we'll continue it. There again, I appreciate your thoughtfulness in looking this, and we certainly don't think IT is the only. We all need to be, participants in making good policy and making sure we follow that policy and making sure that we use these tools to enhance and not to, bring ourselves back. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting and we'll look forward to further conversations on this topic. Thank you.
Thanks.